The following program contains scenes and language of a frank and explicit nature. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome to Film Jitsu, the podcast that wields films like deadly weapons. We are your hosts. I am Jay.
And I am Mike.
On this episode, Mike's taking our first Film Jitsu journey into the minefield that is John Travolta's career by reviewing the actor's 2019 offering, The Fanatic, a thriller directed by none other than Limp Bizkit's Fred Durst that seems to ask as much of the audience as it does Travolta to accept him as a developmentally disabled Uber fan of a Hollywood actor played by an all-grown-up Devon Sawa. If that's not enough prestige content to fill an hour, we're also going to list off our bottom 5 obsessions for movies, and then play a round of Kick 2, Pick 2 before Mike gets back at me for making him watch Travolta's haircut for 90 minutes by assigning me some horrible flick for our next episode. But ahead of all those shenanigans, let's roll the trailer for the movie that critic Rex Reed simply described as, "It's a disaster."
Is it difficult to find famous people's houses?
I use my Star Map app. You have to be careful. I don't want you to be accused of stalking.
Hey, you can't just come to my private residence looking for me. Listen, pal, I don't know how you found me, but I don't ever want to see you in this neighborhood again.
Mike, I've been gently poking at you with things like Larger Than Life and 1976's King Kong, tearing down your screen idols in small pieces to make you, I don't know, hopefully question your longtime affection for their talents or something. But this time, I'm taking a page from your rule book. The Fanatic looks positively terrible, but I will say this. Travolta seems to be committing himself way too much to this role. And if that's the case, I've got to ask, why? Is there something about The Fanatic, either in its finished form or perhaps within the screenplay, that would explain why Travolta immersed himself so deeply into this part?
There is no acceptable reason for why John Travolta has done what he has done with this film. You quoted Rex Reed saying it's a disaster. That might be the nicest thing that gets said about this flick for the entire time that we are recording.
Oh.
I know we try not to just spend our whole reviews quoting other reviewers, but as a follow-up that sheds a little light onto your question, Michael O'Sullivan from the Washington Post said that this movie does not live up to the extravagantly wounded ferocity with which Travolta attacks his part.
Oh, that's what I'm talking about. That's exactly.
It's crazy. This movie is deeply offensive.
Oh, really?
For a number of reasons. Yes. It is far and away the movie that I have enjoyed the least so far on Film Jitsu.
Oh my God, you're kidding me.
There's nothing to like about it. It's not fun. It's not funny. It's not interesting or exciting. It is, if anything, grating and charmless and myopic and offensive. It's a lot of things and all of them bad. I had no idea going into this film. I heard its reputation. It's a movie that has been highlighted on my list for you for a long time, as I mentioned when you gave it to me in our last episode, because I know this film by its reputation. I didn't know a lot about it. What I definitely didn't know until I started watching it is that John Travolta portrays a character with a developmental disability. Mm-hmm. I think we are supposed to take this to be some degree of autism. I don't know. It's never really stated in the movie, but holy shit, Jason. This portrayal, I am offended on behalf of anybody that has ever cared about anybody with a developmental disability, because what we get here is Travolta basically doing like autism face, right? Like we've seen blackface. That's this. It is so far beyond the pale. And I know that a lot of times during these reviews, I try hard not to just regurgitate things we've read on IMDb. But one of the things that I couldn't help but notice, because I do check out that trivia, and I like to dig in a little bit on the background of the film after I've watched it. And apparently, Travolta has said that he did this movie sort of in tribute to his son, Jet, who apparently also has a developmental disability.
Yeah.
And I am blown away by that information. Just absolutely blown away by that information. Because at best, what we have here is him really, really genuinely attacking this performance. He's trying very hard to portray somebody with a disability, but he does that in a manner that is so cartoonish and then thrown into a film whose script takes that character and makes him the villain. It's every bad stereotype, worst impulse. It's every bad bit of information you've ever had about a character with a disability, so that I cannot, for the life of me, understand what Travolta would think about this portrayal of somebody with a disability is the kind of thing that he could look his kid in the face and say, yeah, you know what? I really represented in this film.
I need to get an autograph from Amanda.
I'm gonna need you to
Just let me have one autograph, Amanda.
Okay, that's enough. Let's go. Come on.
No, don't let him do this to me, Amanda. I'm a fan. I'm a #1 fan. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. I came here to see Hunter Dunbar. Leah!
It sounds really wrong-headed on its face. Yeah.
From start to finish. From start to finish. And we will get into what's wrong with this movie as far as telling a story goes, and the filmmaking and all of that kind of stuff, because there are things to quibble about along the way for sure.
But the earnestness of Travolta's performance seemed real. It seemed like he put it all in there, as perhaps wrongly written as the thing might be, and as idiotically named. I mean, there wasn't the character named Moose or something like that, which really...
Yeah, and who Moose is, a guy who is obsessed with Hollywood fanfare. He is somebody who's always collecting autographs and memorabilia. But where that goes so quickly is in taking a character who has this intellectual disability and pushing his fanaticism to the point where he becomes dangerous.
There's two questions that I have. The first one I was just going to shoot out was The Fan, the movie with Robert De Niro.
Right.
And was it Wesley Snipes as the baseball player that De Niro's obsessed with? And De Niro was sort of, I guess, more of a temperamental, kind of short-circuited guy there, and not developmentally disabled.
That's right. And the fact that we're even comparing those two characters is the problem. De Niro's character is a psychopath. He's a psychopath.
Right.
What we're to believe then through The Fanatic is that because Moose is autistic, he is then somehow predisposed to becoming violent.
Oh, I see. Okay. So rather than De Niro, who's just simmering with rage and anger and violent tendency, because this guy is developmentally disabled, it's an equation. It's equaling the psychopathy of De Niro. Oh, that's so ugly. That's so ugly.
It is ugly. We're almost led to believe that Moose is not smart enough to not become violent. Like, the math doesn't compute. Specifically in this case, Moose is obsessed with this actor Hunter Dunbar, who I think we're supposed to take as some kind of big action hero. I got kind of maybe a Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal kind of vibe. Maybe actually kind of a John Travolta kind of vibe, perhaps, where he wants to meet Hunter Dunbar. It's his favorite actor. He thinks he's incredible and everything. And then, don't meet your heroes. When he meets Hunter Dunbar, the guy's an asshole to him. He's the last one in line at a signing when he walks out. And Moose doesn't get his memorabilia autographed in that moment. And it's like it short circuits Moose's brain. Like, it's not right. It's not fair. That's not how it's supposed to work. And that pushes him towards violence. And
so you really think that in The Fanatic, that what they were trying to do was say, because this guy's developmentally disabled in some way, if exposed to the wrong kind of stimuli, he's going to become violent. That's sort of the crux of it.
Yeah, maybe not in a finger pointy kind of way, but the way that the math works in this movie, if Moose had gotten his signature, none of this ever would have happened. He never would have been violent. He never would have attacked. It's like he Mr. Magoo's himself into a home invasion. Like, if the cards hadn't fallen where they did, none of this would have happened.
Oh my God, this just sounds so idiotic.
It is beyond idiotic.
Wow.
And
we don't want to blow any spoilers here, but let's say it kind of turns out okay for old Moosey by the end of this thing.
Nope.
It doesn't?
No, not even a little.
Oh, I thought it did.
The way that this film ends is Moose has had his fingers blown off.
Yes.
He's been stabbed in the eye, and he's shuffling through the streets of Los Angeles.
Right.
And people think that he's doing some sort of cosplay.
Right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the celebrity guy who's an asshole in real life gets his comeuppance for the murder of a housekeeper that Moose accidentally killed. Right? As part of that oopsie Mr. Magoo home invasion, right?
So what happens is Moose trespasses onto Hunter Dunbar's property because he's still just trying to get this autograph and explain that he's a fan and not a bad guy, and he just won't let it go. And he encounters this housekeeper who is scared by him, and they tussle a little bit, and he knocks her over, and she hits her head and dies.
Right.
And Moose is like, oops, and walks away.
Right.
So again, this is a moment where we're led to believe that Moose has killed somebody because he's not smart enough not to kill somebody.
Good heavens.
Good heavens.
Before you push forward with this anymore, I did have a second question that I wanted to ask. What is the difference between what Travolta's doing here and then, let's say, something like what Dustin Hoffman does in Rain Man? Something like that. Is it any different? Is there a different kind of sensitivity? Or is it because it's a better script that's about a different thing?
I think that if you were to take Travolta's commitment to this performance and put it into a film that was about something very different, it wouldn't feel nearly as offensive as it does. I think that were Moose a character that had autism and did not become violent, I would perhaps feel differently about it. And look, there's a conversation to be had about people that do not have disabilities portraying people that do.
Yeah.
There's conversations to be had about straight actors playing gay characters. And I think we could talk about that all day and land in a different place based on every different performance. But I will say that this is not exactly the same thing as, let's say, a Forrest Gump character or a Rain Man character.
This sounds similar to me with some of the umbrage that you take when you watch films about older people that are viewed as a threat because they're entering dementia or they have some sort of cognitive disability.
Yeah. Specifically when dementia is a bad guy. And I would be really curious to hear from people. You know, there are people in my lives that are autistic and go about their world with autism. And I would be really curious to hear from somebody who is autistic, to hear what they have to say about this performance and this film. I'd be interested to hear if they feel differently about the performance itself versus the narrative in which this performance exists. I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe somebody says, wow, I really think that Travolta portrayed an autistic character in an authentic way up until the story does this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
This seems like it falls at the feet of writer-director Fred Durst, who we know much better as a musician for Limp Bizkit. Is there something to look at here? I mean, I heard that he based some of the screenplay on toxic fandom that he had encountered over the years.
And I'm sure that's probably true. And I think that we can talk about Stan, the Eminem song, and that's, you know, now we have a whole phrase for that. In fact, Devon Sawa played Stan in the music video, but I that's true. That is a true thing. Yeah. That's real.
This is too much. We're caught in some sort of weird spiral.
I know. I think that this script by Fred Durst is just as hacky and unbearable as the new metal that Fred Durst made in the early 2000s is, as far as technical filmmaking goes, he's not a hack. In fact, the one thing he might be guilty of is doing that thing where you want to do everything you know how to do in making a movie and put it in one movie. I swear to God, in the first 120 seconds of this movie, we got every shot he's ever known about. Ever. We got the low angle shot, the high angle shot, everything, including a goddamn animated sequence, which, Jason, throughout this movie, we get these like almost chalkboard animation transition interstitials. It's so unnecessary. And it was almost like everything Fred Durst has ever learned about a movie is in here, which is why at the end of the day, this movie felt to me like the absolute worst version of the film we talked about for our last episode, The Room.
Yes. It seems like there's a weird kinship, two sides of a coin.
It is like a charmless, dark, idiotic, poorly conceived version of The Room. Everything that you love about Tommy Wiseau's film that we talked at great length about at our last episode is not present in this movie. But everything else is. The internal logic that isn't there, the performances that are either way too big or way too dumb, the line deliveries that don't make any sense given what's going on. Devon Sawa's character, I don't know what we're doing here. This Hunter Dunbar, I have no reason to believe this guy is famous because they don't show us that he's famous. We just hear about it. If there's going to be a character that is some big celebrity, then we need flashbulbs. We need the 9 o'clock news talking about this guy. We need paparazzi. We need something so that I get that this guy is actually famous, because other than the fact that Moose is excited to see him, I have no idea what the level of this guy is. We get a billboard here or there.
I was just going to say, there must be some mock posters, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
Hard precision.
The impression that I get is that perhaps Hunter Dunbar is like Threat Level Midnight from The Office, kind of famous.
Right, or something.
It's hard to say, but it's tough to get worked up about this character. Even in Empire Records, we get excited because it's Rex Manning Day.
Right.
And that film does a good job of giving us as the audience some idea that we're getting excited for Rex Manning Day. And it works in that comedy, but here, I just get this idiot who is mean, but also has a kid that he loves. He's cheating on his wife with the housekeeper that Moose ends up killing later. And here's the one thing, Jay, as we get really towards the end. If at any point in this film, anywhere, at any time, for any reason, Hunter Dunbar had picked up a telephone and called the police,
oh, God,
none of this would have happened. It was one of those films where the whole time I was like, why hasn't he called the cops?
Yeah.
Why hasn't somebody called the cops?
Yeah.
Why hasn't he? If he's this big celebrity, where is his protection detail, his bodyguard? Okay, maybe he's not that big a deal. Fine. Then call the police. Hey, there's a guy following me. He engages with Moose every time he sees him.
Oh,
and it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Well, listen, I know that this was definitely a slap in the face for you, but you've given me many a slap. So I felt like you finally gotten some payback here.
Absolutely. This was terrible. This was a bad film. It really validated for me why I wanted to give it to you in the first place. I wish that you had to watch this instead of me. Absolutely.
I think I found out why it sucked so bad and how it got made. Did you know that this film was the first release of Redbox's distribution arm when they launched in 2019?
Like the DVD vending machine?
100%. Crazy
No
to
way.
think they thought they could make their own content and that it's a good idea.
Let's just do all those.
I know. We should. That's it. The Redbox distribution arm.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Redbox only. Despite some sharp dips in revenue in 2019 and 2020, in 2023, Redbox still operated 34,000 rental kiosks with plans to open 1,000 more. So long live physical media. Long live Redbox Entertainment. I want to see the Fanatic too. I know you do as well.
Well, I think Moose is still out there.
He's one eye, but he's out there.
Well, you know what? If I ever get a chance to see Fred Durst, I'm going to kick him in the dick. That's all there is to it. Like,
That's so specific.
yeah, I know. I thought it was going to be because of Limp Bizkit. It turns out, no, that's not even what I'm mad about anymore. It's this. And I feel like if a stranger walked up to Fred Durst and kicked him in the dick, he'd know. He'd have to know. He'd be like, oh, fuck, it's the Fanatic, isn't it? And I wouldn't be wrong for doing it.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mike, I used to say during our earlier episodes that once we got to the bottom 5, it would be like having a cinematic breath mint. Oh, no, actually, that was the staff picks. Never mind. Actually, it's just more shit for us once we get to the bottom 5. So on that note, we're talking about our bottom 5 obsessions. And we could take this a couple different ways. I'm curious about the way that you took it.
This list was a little bit more of a challenge than I thought it was going to be when you first came up with it, because I think my brain initially thought of crazy characters. Like, Frank Booth from Blue Velvet is a violent, insane madman of a character, but Norman Bates is obsessed with his mother. So Norman could make my list, but Frank wouldn't. I also challenged myself to avoid straight up horror titles because sometimes a fella needs a little challenge. And I also avoided those late 80s or early 90s psychosexual thrillers, or what I like to call Jason Santo movies. I'm talking about things like The Hand That Rocks the Santo, Single White Santo, Santoing with the Enemy, Indecent Santo, all of those.
Santo Attraction. Yes,
Yeah,
I got
right,
it.
yeah, Santo,
okay, right.
yeah.
Got it.
With all of that out of the way,
All right.
I would really much rather hear what you had for your list than me. So how did you approach it differently?
I did. I did it very similarly. And in fact, my number 5 kind of addresses the same issue that you were talking about with the idea of crazy and the idea of the obsession. So there's a balance in many movies with a central obsession. Right. And that's the weight of the obsession's drawing power as it directly relates to the mental state of the obsessed character, right? So oftentimes I struggled with moving things onto my list because the characters were too unhinged to really call the obsession dumb.
Like Leatherface.
Right, exactly. And what mine was like in the case of something like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Yep.
The movies hang on a villain's hatred for the protagonist.
Right.
It's crazy for sure that Khan would chase him round the moons of Nibia and round the Antares maelstrom and round perdition's flames. Sorry. Before he gives up the chase for Kirk. But when the obsession grows and blooms into all that's left, then the madness seems to feel forced.
Right, right.
For me, the prime example of this is 1972's Aguirre, The Wrath of God.
Oh, wow.
Werner Herzog's harrowing descent into the unexplored jungles of the Amazon River in pursuit of El Dorado, a fabled city of gold.
Yeah.
Now, casting is part of the issue here. Klaus Kinski, by all indicators, was one totally Looney Tunes fucking guy. Herzog described him as, quote, one of the greatest actors of the century, but also a monster and a great pestilence. Can you imagine somebody calling you a great pestilence?
I would love to have them call me that with that great Werner Herzog voice, though, right? I mean, if somebody was going to call me that, it has to be with that voice.
Well, in this role, Kinski takes the problem some have with Nicholson's Jack Torrance from The Shining, namely that he's bonkers right from the get-go, and Kinski just dials it to 11. And by the time the Amazon expedition starts, it's obvious this thing is going nowhere but to Colonel Kurtztown, because why else would Kinski be at the wheel?
Yeah.
His Aguirre is primed to drive every last member of the expedition to their deaths, including his own teenage daughter, all in pursuit of the promise of untold riches. But before long, his desire is grown, and as the resources diminish and all his people die, his goal to become conqueror of all of the new world. So he just becomes like completely out of his mind. And by the end of the film, he's floating alone on a half-sunken raft down the Amazon with monkeys that have jumped onto the boat with him. And his idea is to take over all of the Americas, the new world. Yeah. And he's like looking at the monkeys and he's going, and who is with me? Yeah. And it's all just so outrageous. No one that nuts lives that long and is that obsessed. So in this case, for me, the obsession of El Dorado, the obsession of the pursuit of riches, mixed with the casting of Klaus Kinski, who's fucking off his rocker right away.
Right.
It's so thin. It's just thin.
Yeah.
You got nowhere to go but downriver and into hell.
Yeah. Which isn't to say that it's a bad film. I mean, it's a very good movie.
I like it. I like the movie.
You're dead to rights with your description of that character. We're probably going to talk about Werner Herzog again before I'm done.
Oh, cool.
Which maybe we should have anticipated. But I do want to start with my number 5, which is here because it's a truly lame obsession.
Okay, yeah.
If you're going to be obsessed with something, it should be the kind of thing worthy of obsession. And this one is from one of my very favorite movies of all time. Not a great film, but one of my very favorites. I'm going with Jareth the Goblin King's obsession with Sarah.
Oh, yeah.
In Jim Henson's Labyrinth. It's here because there is nothing to be obsessed about. Sarah pretty much sucks, Jason. She's whiny, she's entitled, she's kind of dumb. The movie gives us absolutely no reason whatsoever as to why David Bowie's Jareth is obsessed with her. Now, this obsession does give us the As the World Falls Down ballroom sequence, which is a song that I love enough that it was the last song I danced with my new wife to at our wedding. But nothing about Sarah deserves this fixation. The only justification I can make for this issue, or really the situation as a whole, is that Jareth might be a figment of Sarah's own imagination, so he's obsessed with her because she's obsessed with herself.
Oh, yeah.
So as long as I don't kind of overthink things here, especially the teenager Bowie, all that kind of stuff, Jareth being obsessed with this truly terrible and lame Sarah is my number 5.
Now, I know that Twilight started out as 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction.
Yep.
But if you think about it, it is exactly the same thing, right? Edward.
Yes, and it almost made my list.
Right, he's 100-something years old, and the girl that he falls for there,
Yep, she's a Ritz cracker of a human.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Exactly. So it seems like a long time ago on the first iteration of Film Jitsu, I was on a round table with you guys talking about Twilight, and I ended up sort of justifying why they make these milquetoast sort of nobody type characters.
You went to the mat for love on that one, Jay.
I really did. But they make them that way so that those young adults will put themselves easily into the skin of that person.
Yeah.
And feel special and feel, because they really aren't, but it's easy to access those personalities. So I find it interesting that maybe something like that was happening with Labyrinth. That's a possibility anyway. I'm just putting it out there, but
I think in this case, Sarah wasn't necessarily a blank canvas. She was kind of whiny and petulant and annoying.
What do you want? You want a story? Huh? Okay. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful young girl whose stepmother always made her stay home with the baby. And the baby was a spoiled child, and he wanted everything for himself, and the young girl was practically a slave.
Thank you for not overthinking the teenager David Bowie situation, which I recognize is a minefield, but I think it's...
We'll be getting to that minefield probably later with one of my picks, so
great.
we'll see how that goes.
Speaking of your picks, what do you have for your number 4?
My number 4 is the most obvious on my list. It had to be said, and it's Fatal Attraction, right? It has to be. 1987. I had to do it.
A Jason Santo movie.
Okay, all right. Glenn Close's obsession, let's just be real clear here, though, is Michael Douglas. Seriously. Why is it that ludicrously attractive, awesome women kept falling for Michael Douglas in obsessive ways? Whether it's Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, or Demi Moore in Disclosure, or, of course, most notably and most unhinged, Glenn Close as Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction.
Or Catherine Zeta-Jones in real life?
Okay, sure. Yes, let's bring real life into this. What the fuck is going on? Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction decides she's all in on this obviously unfaithful schlub who thought he was just getting his yayas while his wife and daughter were out of town. Now, I know this thing is supposed to be a warning of some kind to the yuppies of yesteryear, guys modeling themselves after, I don't know, Douglas's character Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, perhaps. But why the hell is she so obsessed with this guy?
Yeah.
He's odious. And her fatal attraction for him is less an indictment on her and more on the foolishly lazy bullshit writing. This flick is viewed as a classic, sexy thriller. I'll admit, it's both sexy and entertaining thanks to director Adrian Lyne's smoky, sensual visuals. But screenwriter James Dearden made Alex so hollow, so pathetic, that it's shocking to me that this flick was nominated for the Oscar for Best Screenplay. I'm a fan of phantasmagoric, life-ruining villains in films like Pacific Heights and Ricochet, but in Fatal Attraction, right from the get-go, I feel like Alex is nothing more than a tool to move the story along and punish the irresistible Michael Douglas. I know it was an obvious one, and I think that the obsession just rings so false to me when you look at Michael Douglas and that string of leading man bullshit that he's pulled over the years. I like the guy, but I mean, what? Demi Moore?
Right. Well, that's a great pick, Jay. My number 4, as I assembled my list, I found myself considering a whole bunch of Darren Aronofsky characters, from Pi to Black Swan, the wrestler, Mother.
Yeah.
I was having a hard time deciding which of the bunch was really worthy of the bottom 5 treatment. Then it dawned on me that the pick wasn't one of these characters. My number 4 is Darren Aronofsky's obsession with obsession.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Overwhelmingly the theme of his movies. The characters in the movies I mentioned are all obsessed with something. Mathematics, ballet, pro wrestling. Don't even get me started on Noah. That's a movie that almost definitely will be a Film Jitsu
That
episode
needs to be
at some
one.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. But here's the thing. As I browse this filmography, and I'm a fan of Aronofsky in general, I noticed a slow but steady trickle of diminishing returns. I don't think this obsession with obsessed characters is serving Aronofsky well as a storyteller at this point, and I'm ready for the guy to just try something else. While his movies, they're always well made, they're always visually impressive, I think this obsession with obsession is making him one note, and honestly, an uninteresting storyteller to me at this point.
I get it. Yeah. The Wrestler I felt was very, very good. And that's mid-career, I guess, at this point, right?
Yeah, they're good films on their own. I like these films, but I like each one just a little less than the other. I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I do too.
It's just not trending in the right direction for me. Like I said, on their own, I like all of them, but I become a little less interested in what he's doing all the way along.
Fair enough. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, if nothing else, we learned that we will definitely be watching Noah. One of us will be. I hope it's not me because I couldn't. I actually thought that Noah was one of those cheesy sci-fi movies when I saw the beginning of it.
Yep.
I thought, this is one of those knockoff movies. Like it's going to be Noah with like an apostrophe in the middle. So it's Noah, or something like that,
Like a transmorpher situation.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, my number 3 is Play It Again, Sam from 1972. Woody Allen wrote and acted it as the lead in this rare and sort of, it's weird for his career to have a misfire.
Yeah.
For me, back in the 70s. I really was a big fan, liked his stuff. He didn't direct this one, but it was directed by the very capable Herbert Ross. Allen plays an unlucky in love and recently divorced goofball whose obsession with the film Casablanca results in him seeing the ghost of Humphrey Bogart, who gives him, as ghosts do, relationship advice.
Right.
The film is an early attempt at the kind of meta bullshit we're seeing endlessly in films now. Think crap like the Space Jam movies. This isn't as winking, but it's cringy to see the filmmakers attempt to bring Bogart back to life, to give advice to Alan's woeful lead character, who then attempts to be like Bogart with allegedly comedic results that instead just feel completely untethered from reality. Like, who is actually going to do this shit? And when the ending of Play It Again, Sam finds Alan's character quoting verbatim the end of Casablanca, my eyes rolled so hard that it was audible.
Inside of us, we both know you belong to Dick. You're part of his work, the thing that keeps him going. If that plane leaves the ground and you're not on it with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
It's beautiful.
It's from Casablanca. I waited my whole life to say it.
In the next moment, the film's version of Bogart explains to Alan's character that he's now learned to be himself. It's silly, unbelievable, and it shocks me that this film still has a following considering how foolish the entire conceit is. So, at number 3, Play It Again, Sam.
I have to confess, as much as I enjoyed watching Woody Allen movies once upon a time in my life, this is one I've never caught up with. I'm not sure now, in light of Woody Allen, that I'm super interested in going back and checking it out. With your fair warning, I guess I definitely won't. So thank you for sparing me that nightmare, I guess. It turns out that maybe real world obsessions are more interesting than the ones that get made up for movies. And while my number 3 is a documentary, it isn't quite up to the standards of Werner Herzog or Ken Burns. It does highlight a pretty out there obsession. My number 3 is the competitive endurance tickling found in the 2016 documentary from New Zealand called Tickled. The movie starts as this silly, low-key curiosity, kind of blushing over something that's a little bit risque. This idea of competitive endurance tickling events, which I guess is a real thing. And it portrays tickling as not quite a fetish, but also not a fetish. And it seems like the movie is just going to capture this weird corner of the internet and move on. But then it sprawls into this kind of bizarro true crime mystery thriller, at the center of which is this obsession with tickling. The whole entire idea of competitive tickling horrifies me. And to be clear, I'm not kink shaming here, right? I wouldn't do that. And I'm not even convinced that this documentary is about a kink. It's more about what happens when you're into something weird and the rest of the world finds out about it. A little bit like if the people that I work with found out that I host a podcast where I talk about competitive endurance tickling documentaries. So for that reason, maybe alone, this is my number 3.
I wonder if you hate tickling so much because it's like spiders crawling on you.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. You son of a bitch.
That must be it.
I mean, it's definitely a control thing. Like, I do not want to not be in control. I like being in control of myself. I like being in control of situations. It's why, for as long as we've known each other, could you tell me 2 times that you've seen me intoxicated?
No. Yeah, no, I never.
I don't like not being in control of things. That's not my thing.
So you're clearly a top in the competitive tickling world, not a bottom.
Yeah, I guess I would be. Yep, I guess you're right. But yeah, that was the whole idea was enough to make my list of a bottom 5 obsession. It's a weird little flick. It's worth a watch, but it's weird.
I'm intrigued and also slightly terrified, so I'm not sure where to go with it. But
you're just a little turned on. Let's be
100%.
You're just a little.
No, we already know that. Somewhere out there, there's a movie called Santo Just Got Tickled or something. So it's like,
Tickle Me Santo. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, my number 2 for our bottom 5 obsessions is Cannonball Run 2 from 1984. Man, this movie's so painfully dumb. Played by Ricardo Montalban, King Abdul Ben Falafes needs to have his son, who's played by Jamie Farr, his need to have his son win the Cannonball Run so as to, quote, emblazon the falafel name as the fastest in the world after the Sheik lost the race in the first movie
Mm-hmm.
is impossibly fucking stupid as far as obsessions go. But when it's discovered that there is no race that year, the king says to just buy a race. Christ. It's safe to say this comedy, and I use comedy in quotes here, is terribly unfunny, right? So it's hard to actually call it that because it's an attempt at laugh, so we have to call it a comedy. But anyway, regardless, it's safe to say it's an example of the type of brain-dead scripting bad films will justify because they're, quote, not about the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. You can look at the obsessive motivations of countless comedy and family film villains, and they're all pretty goofy, usually centering on like a kind of childhood experience that propels the character into a career of mayhem.
Right.
Like Syndrome from The Incredibles.
Right. Yep.
But to spend a vault of oil money on setting up a cross-continent race against the likes of Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, the fucking Rat Pack, including Sinatra, and Jackie Chan in one of his first ever Hollywood roles. This is just, it's so preposterously idiotic. You're clearly not supposed to ask why, but Montalban and Farr basically doing Arab blackface as a setup for a road race picture.
Yeah.
There's no more important question than why. Although how and for whom and who the hell thought this was a good idea are all solid follow-ups. About this film, Roger Ebert said, quote, one of the laziest insults to the intelligence of moviegoers that I can remember, in his 1-star review, while his co-host on At the Movies, Gene Siskel, gave the movie only a 0.5 star and called it worthless. So, number 2, Cannonball Run 2. Go fuck yourself, Hal Needham.
That's an excellent pick, sir. Boy, I'm pretty impressed that your brain recalled that one. Because of all the things going on in that movie, I think perhaps lost in the shuffle
is the reason, the rationale.
Is the reason for the movie,
right,
yeah, for sure.
Right.
Interestingly, my number 2 is another documentary, and it's certainly more straightforward than my number 5, Goblin King and a Teenager pick. While Tickled isn't quite up to the standards of Werner Herzog is up to the standards of Werner Herzog, and I'm going with a tragic obsession from the very good 2005 Herzog documentary, Grizzly Man.
That's a great movie.
It is a great movie, and Timothy Treadwell's obsession with the Alaskan grizzly bears, which ultimately leads to the death of he and his girlfriend, has to be on this list for me.
Yeah.
He's obsessed with these animals. This obsession that he has, it's one that's founded on love and respect for the grizzly. He spends summers with them, season after season, something like 13 seasons that he studied them, and he filmed them, and he lived near and around them. But in the end, this obsession caused him to be just a little too comfortable with them. And ultimately, he ended up essentially living with them, which finally caught up to him when he and his girlfriend were mauled and eaten by the bears in 2003. And one of Treadwell's cameras infamously caught the audio of this horrifying ordeal.
Yeah.
Herzog put together a beautiful documentary, like he usually does, and it captures the humanity and the love and the tragedy, I think, of Timothy Treadwell's story. It never feels exploitative to me, and in the end, it kind of tells this story of how Icarus flew a little too close to the sun.
Yeah, for sure.
It was a toss-up for me between this Herzog documentary and his film Fitzcarraldo, about a man so obsessed with building an opera house in the jungle that he hauls a steamship through the Andes.
Yes.
Speaking of Klaus Kinski.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when you were talking about Aronofsky and the diminishing returns of his obsession with obsession, I was thinking about Herzog and how he's had an up and down career as well, but obsession has served him so well.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting stuff. Well, we're finally in my pole position, number 1, and it has to be, and I don't think there's any way that it couldn't be this movie, 1997's Lolita. Now, this is my second entry on my list for Adrian Lyne, who was also the director of Fatal Attraction. This version of the movie is gross. I find the novel brilliant, but yikes, right? Thematically, just so upsetting, so wrong-headed. It's funny that we're talking about the Fanatic and how wrong-headed that is.
Yeah.
Lolita very similar, right? Is just an absolutely reprehensible lead character. I think Kubrick struck the right tone with the satirical notes that made the proceedings less unseemly in his version, but the late 90s version has that late 90s Cinemax stank all over it.
Yeah.
And it's about a kid, right? Ultimately, those lingering shots, the sort of sheen that's on everything is not the way to do this film. It's just not right. And
we have grappled with this story a number of times for a number of bottom fives. It's something that has snuck its way into our conversations, I think, because when we're talking about bottom five stuff,
it's going to come up.
The Lolita story comes up. We may be getting to a point soon where we may be inducting something into the Hall of Lame. I don't know that we're there yet, but you're spot on with the pick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated thing because there are aspects to this film that are very good. You know, Jeremy Irons and Dominique Swain add a lot of complicated layers to their characters, but ultimately this whole damn thing hinges on an obsession that as an audience member, you don't want to understand. And that lingering, stylized male gaze, it's just the total opposite of what's called for here. I find it interesting that, you know, there's this, there's a writer in Hollywood. He's written several films. He's fairly well known. His name's James Toback. He's an uber lech. Just gross. This guy, I've never liked his movies very much. I don't like him. He has a track record as an alleged sexual abuser.
Whoa.
It said he was accused of about acting with sexual impropriety toward 395 different women.
Jesus Christ.
Right, exactly. He counts this film and Kubrick's original as in his top 10.
Wow.
Yeah.
Has this guy ever faced justice?
Yeah, he's doing it now. Like all of these things are now coming out and he's sort of facing.
God.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just one of these. The book itself is phenomenally well written, the Nabokov book, and it dives into the madness, right? I think Kubrick's version, which is more about Quilty, sort of does a good job making it sort of black, darkly humorous without the lingering male gaze that Adrian Lyne's version really leans heavily on. And so that's why it made my number one. I couldn't think of, it was the first thing that popped into my head and I had to talk about it. I know it's a tough subject. I know we've talked about it, but I mean, we've had bottom fives that have been like, well, how can we not talk about this? So, you know,
I considered Lolita for my list. I didn't include it because I had arbitrarily decided to steer clear of sort of those sexual obsessions, I guess. It just, for me, it wasn't where I was interested, but you're right.
I think what I grapple with as a modern day feminist that watches film as much as I do and who grew up during the 80s and 90s watching films and 70s, because I'm that old, but I'm finding myself looking at all of this and wanting to process it differently, wanting to talk about it differently. Because when I was a kid, I was looking at it, I was like, oh, there's boobs. Yay. Right? We joke about it all the time. Right. But, and the truth is I'm probably still a little bit like that, but not when it comes to certain things. And I want to study what is wrong there and point it out. And I think it's worth talking about, even on a silly show like ours.
Jay, my number one, believe it or not, is not a documentary this time. There we go. Or at least I'm pretty sure that it isn't. I think when you're talking about bottom five obsessions, you don't have to look any further than the tragic story of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Talk about the most objectively correct answer. Tolkien has given us the all-time obsession as poor Gollum is consumed with the one ring of power that slowly transforms him into this abomination of madness. The whole thing is really very sad. Gollum never gets his hero redemption, certainly not the one that Boromir gets. He just slowly circles the drain for hundreds of years, and it's sad. And for me, the look on Gollum's face when he finally grabs the ring that last time, this moment of overwhelming bliss, when he's being burned alive in the lava of Mount Doom, it's kind of heartbreaking, really. And because Gollum was never a villain, he was a victim. And shying away from being political here, but it's our podcast, so fuck it. The look on Gollum's face, right, when he grasps this thing amidst all this horror going around him, I've seen that look before in the eyes of some people wearing those red MAGA hats. So perhaps Tolkien was onto something about humanity here. I'm not sure. And certainly Peter Jackson and Andy Serkis brought it to life in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So that obsession with the thing that will destroy you is my number one.
And that makes sense. I mean, if you're going to have a list of bottom 5 obsessions, I didn't put it on my list because, again, I was hanging on obsessions not that I was afraid of having or that I was thought were negative necessarily, that were more just like disruptions to the narratives of the film or weren't handled right, or that just in that I understood the lure of the power of the ring and the way the ring calls to people. And ultimately I kind of was like, well, it's supernatural in tone. I can't really. So I stepped away from it.
Master is our friend. Our friend. Master betrayed us. No, it's business. Leave us alone. Filthy little hobbitses. They stole it from us. No.
And so for me, I think because it was just so goddamn sad.
Yeah.
That's why it ended up on my list.
No, that's fair. No, I totally get it. Mike, after talking about the Fanatic and all of our bottom 5 obsessions, I felt not like staying in that playground any longer. And what I did is I found one thread that I wanted to pull at, and that was something that you joked about earlier on in the show, and that is Redbox. More specifically, Redbox actually has a category of movies that they put in their kiosk. They call it Back at the Kiosk at Redbox. So Back at the Kiosk at Redbox really just means that these are older titles that they have brought back into rotation in their 34,000 locations.
Okay.
Because maybe there's something going on in the news, or maybe there's a sequel out there, or maybe it's just a really good movie. Who knows? A lot of these titles weren't great. So, but I did find 4. And that's what we're choosing from right now. Beetlejuice, Knives Out, Twister, and Get Out.
Wow.
I think the beauty of this is those are 4 movies that have no real connective tissue at all.
Wow.
But they're all movies that I know you like a lot. And now I'm making you choose out of these 4 totally unrelated movies.
Wow. This is the hardest one we've ever done.
By far, without a doubt.
For me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My first inclination is that Beetlejuice is like one of these things is not like the other, which
usually means you would keep it. No, isn't it?
No. This is the one that feels like might be the one that I might set apart.
Is your Tim Burton love filled out more by like an Edward Scissorhands, maybe a Pee-wee's Big Adventure? Yeah. Like you have those still. You could lose Beetlejuice. Michael Keaton, Gina Davis, a young Alec Baldwin.
I think it has to do more with my affinity for these other 3 movies, which 2 of them are obviously much newer. Beetlejuice has the nostalgia thing for sure, as does Twister.
Twister has the nostalgia thing too.
My early reaction is that I'm going to set Beetlejuice aside, and I'm going to let you start figuring out what yours are as I ponder further.
I think I'm going to set Twister aside probably because of that Van Halen song that they play in the middle. So I'm going to just set that one aside. I think Twister, even though I do love it. All right, I'm going to just say Twister for mine. What's your next one? What are you going to do?
I can't imagine a world in which I don't keep a film as good as Get Out.
Me too. Same. I'm in the same boat. I don't think I could cut Get Out as much as I love Knives Out. But does that mean we also get rid of Glass Onion?
Well, I'm Knives Out is not off this list for me because now I'm down to Knives Out and Twister, and I don't have my mind made up because I love Knives Out.
Oh, right. You're between Knives Out and Twister. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I was thinking for myself. Yeah, that's right. I already knocked Twister. And for me, it's, I'm keeping Beetlejuice and Get Out.
Wow, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that's going to be what I do. That's tough. I love Rian Johnson. I feel like I just did something really wrong, but I still have The Last Jedi and Brick.
It might have been my favorite film that year. It's a movie that I have showed to so many people.
So good.
But
you love Twister so fucking much.
You know what? Twister just holds a very special place in my heart. I watched the movie in my mom's bedroom so many times while she fell asleep out in the living room. And I had to go do something else. I don't know. I think for me, I have to keep Twister. I have to keep Twister.
Nostalgic value.
Which is insane because what you're doing to me here is you're making me send Beetlejuice and Knives Out, which are two phenomenal
films, yeah. And I'm sending
the Phantom Zone.
I don't feel as though Twister is a great film any longer. I saw it not long ago, and it didn't.
It's okay to be wrong about things.
It didn't hold up the way that it used to for me. It didn't have that same kind of joy that I had for it when I was younger.
So I just want to be clear here. You're going to take a movie that has Bill Paxton,
yes, I know,
and Philip Seymour Hoffman,
yeah,
and you're going to get rid of that.
And Cameron Fry, yeah.
But I'm talking about two guys that we lost, two actors that we lost too early.
I know.
Performances, we already missed out on decades of performances that we should have had that we are now not going to have because of their early passing. And you're going to take this away as well?
As long as I have Philip Seymour Hoffman in The Big Lebowski and I have Bill Paxton in Aliens, I think I'm golden. As long as those two never end up on one of our Kick 2 Pick 2s, then I'm okay. So I'm okay with getting rid of Twister. There's no way I was getting rid of Get Out. I love the fact that neither one of us could even think about getting rid of Get Out. I wonder in 20 years if we'll feel the same way. I wonder.
I really think we will. I really think so. This is a movie that I don't think is going anywhere.
Well, there you go. So for Jay, it's Beetlejuice and Get Out. For Mike, it's Twister and Get Out. Tell us where we were right. Tell us where we were wrong. Tell us what your two were out of this Kick 2 Pick 2. You can reach Mike at mike@filmjitsu.net, or you can reach me at jay@filmjitsu.net, or you can hit us up on our socials. We've got Threads, X, and Facebook. Feel free to hit us up at any of those and tell us where we're right or wrong with our Kick 2 Pick 2s.
Jason, for reasons that I don't think either of us intended, this movie felt kind of heavy.
Oh.
I don't know why,
but
it did. Here we are. It's June and we're about to kick off the summer. And I think that for our upcoming film, the next movie you have to watch, it should be a good old-fashioned summertime something or other. And I don't know about you, but when summer rolls around, a lot of people pack up the car, put the kids in the back, grab the towels and the shovels and all that kind of stuff, and they make their way to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for our upcoming episode, Jason, you're going to make your way to a beach. You're going to make your way to Blood Beach.
Oh, my God. Awful. I don't even know what to say.
That's right.
Oh, God.
I don't know what to say either. 1980.
Oh, shit.
Directed by nobody, starring nobody.
Yeah. This is just tripe.
Uh-huh.
What am I going to say about Blood Beach, damn it?
I can't wait to find out, but this is like just good old-fashioned, shitty summer flicks.
This is drive-in fodder where you're not paying attention to anything that's going on in the movie except for the jump scare, so it can scare your partner closer toward you. I think the beach eats people, if I'm not mistaken, in Blood Beach. Like, I think they
Jason,
get eaten by the sand.
It's a blood beach. What's hard to understand here? You go to a beach, there's not supposed to be blood. At this beach, it's blood. Blood Beach. I can't wait to take the trip. I think that we needed to do something fun. I wanted to kick off the summer with something a little silly and lighthearted and ridiculous. And that seemed like the pick for me. And what I want to do here is our bottom 5 beach scenes.
Sounds good. Yeah, the bottom 5 beach scenes. That's going to be a tricky one.
I think so. That's our movie for our next episode. I think it's going to be a good time. I think you might have fun watching it, certainly more than I did watching the Fanatics.
Oh, and probably a lot more than I had watching Men. Let's just be clear here. You make it sound like I'm bringing down the gravity of the show by picking the Fanatic, and you're the asshole over here going, Watch men. He's like, fuck you, Mike.
No, you're right, but this is what I'm saying. We've been in a dark place.
Well, it's winter, okay? It's dark.
I know. And so let's celebrate the summer. We're going to throw open the windows. We're going to grab our shovels and our towels, put on some sunscreen, and make a visit down to Blood Beach. Jason, thank you so much for this week's episode. I hope that you're still here next week. I hope that you don't get swallowed up by a beach of blood. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. It might happen. Yeah. Everybody's going to have to come back and give a listen to find out. That's the cliffhanger.
Yeah. Until then,
we have been your hosts. I am Mike.
And I'm Jay.
See you next time.
Stanno messi na te, хочу знать закаты. Wiesz, baczu sate i sate. Karate, nie хочу tak za nimi kiaj. Zostanę i zadzie.
People, I feel like I'm doing a fucking ad for Redbox right now. Hopefully we can pull in some Redbox dollars here.
This is fantastic. I'm all about this.